Clara Vance sat at the long, polished mahogany conference table, her fingers lightly resting on the manila folder in front of her seat. It was exactly 17 minutes past 4 on a Friday afternoon, a time deliberately chosen by the corporate executives to minimize disruption and ensure a swift, quiet exit. Across the table sat Bradley Thorne, the newly appointed chief executive officer of Vertex Dynamics, a man whose tailored gray suit was as sharp as his ambition and whose empathy was entirely non-existent. Next to him was Wesley Pratt, the chief financial officer, who was busy scrolling through something on his tablet, pretending to be occupied with important matters. In the corner sat Brenda Greer from Human Resources, her face fixed in a mask of polite neutrality, looking anywhere but at Clara. Bradley slid a check across the table. The figure on the check was $11,000. He tapped the paper with a manicured finger, a smirk playing on his lips. He told Clara that it represented 3 weeks of severance pay. 3 weeks of pay for 21 years of service. He instructed Clara to sign the resignation form immediately, or she would leave with nothing, explaining that the company was moving in a fresh direction. 3 weeks. That was the value they placed on 21 years of dedication, on the late nights, the missed family dinners, and the endless sacrifices Clara hadn't made to help build Vertex Dynamics from a small startup in a damp garage into an enterprise valued at $60 million. Clara looked at the check, then at Bradley's expensive wristwatch, then at Brenda, who remained silent. Wesley cleared his throat and muttered that legacy roles were simply too expensive and that the company needed new energy. New energy was the executive code word for replacing anyone over 40. Clara was 46 years old, and she knew the law. She also remembered her father's words, "Never let a man in a good suit rush you into a bad decision." Bradley demanded an answer by 5 o'clock. Clara opened her folder, took out a clean sheet of company letterhead, and set their resignation form aside. She told Bradley she would draft her own resignation letter. Bradley chuckled, leaning back in his leather chair, telling her to write whatever made her feel better. He thought it was over. He thought he had intimidated her into submission. But Clara locked her office door, took a deep breath, and opened a secure file she and her attorney, Regina Ross, had been preparing. Her resignation letter was simple, consisting of only one sentence. It stated that her resignation would only become effective upon the full settlement of the compensation, equity, and bonuses defined in her executive agreement and under Colorado law. She handed the letter to Brenda at 3 minutes before 5. Brenda glanced at the top line, saw the word resignation, and nodded. She told Clara they would mail her final check. Clara told Brenda to make sure someone read the entire document, then walked out of the building. The automatic glass doors shut behind her, and for the first time in months, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. They believed they had disposed of her, but in reality, they had just signed a contract they did not understand. Clara remembered when she first walked into the original garage office of Vertex Dynamics 21 years ago. The founder, a brilliant engineer who had since retired to the Pacific Northwest, had hired her as his third employee. Together, they had written the core codebase that powered the company's proprietary logistics engine. In those early days, they survived on stale coffee, cold pizza, and the shared belief that they were building something that would last. Clara had designed the compliance bridge, a complex software architecture they called Aegis, which allowed Vertex Dynamics to securely interface with federal and state databases. Over 2 decades, she had updated Aegis, kept it compliant with shifting federal standards, and maintained the cryptographic handshakes that prevented unauthorized access. To the clients, Aegis was a seamless, invisible utility. To Clara, it was a living digital tapestry that she had woven line by line. When Summit Crest Ventures acquired Vertex Dynamics for $60 million, the corporate landscape changed overnight. The founder left, replaced by Bradley Thorne, a corporate climber who viewed employees as line items on a spreadsheet. Bradley brought along Wesley Pratt, a chief financial officer who believed that cost-cutting was the only path to profitability. They immediately set their sights on the veteran staff, those who had built the company but earned salaries that reflected their years of experience. Clara saw the writing on the wall when 3 of her senior engineers, all over the age of 45, were let go in successive months under the guise of organizational restructuring. She knew she would be next, which was why she had spent the previous 6 months working secretly with Regina Ross, an employment attorney who specialized in executive contracts. Clara had carefully reviewed her contract, noting the change in control provisions that the new management seemed to have overlooked. Now, standing in the autumn afternoon light outside the office building, Clara took a deep breath of the crisp Colorado air. She walked to her car, feeling the heavy weight of the last 21 years lift from her shoulders. Bradley and Wesley thought they had executed a brilliant tactical maneuver by ambushing her on a Friday afternoon. They assumed the shock of losing her job would make her desperate, that the fear of having no income would force her to sign the resignation form and accept the $11,000. They did not realize that Clara was not afraid. She had prepared for this moment, and her conditional resignation letter was a legal landmine waiting for them to step on it. Clara put her keys in the ignition, backed out of the parking space, and drove home, ready to let the weekend do its work. She knew that by Monday morning, the office would find itself in a situation they were completely unprepared to handle. Saturday morning was crisp and exceptionally quiet, a peace that felt like a sanctuary after the toxic atmosphere of the Vertex Dynamics office. Clara spent the early hours in her backyard garden, tending to the roses she had planted when she first bought the house. She focused on the physical act of pruning, using her shears to cut away the dead wood and shape the bushes for the coming winter. The repetitive, mindful work allowed her mind to settle. In the soil and the plants, there were no false promises, no corporate doublespeak, and no executives trying to make a name for themselves by destroying other people's lives. Nature operated on rules of patience and care, principles that Bradley Thorne and his management team had long forgotten in their race for short-term profits. She took her time with each branch, observing how the roots ran deep, holding the plant steady against the dry Colorado wind. The garden was a reminder of what it meant to build something of lasting value, rather than the superficial metrics the board demanded. She cleaned her gardening tools, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that she had not felt in years. Her phone sat on the wooden table on her patio, vibrating every few minutes. Clara glanced at the screen but did not pick it up. She could see notifications from the office Slack channels and emails from Bradley's account. They were already experiencing difficulties. She knew exactly what was happening. Over the past year, Clara had repeatedly warned the executive committee that the Aegis compliance bridge was not a static piece of code. It was a dynamic interface that linked their core platform to several high-security government databases, requiring continuous administrative handshakes and manual verification steps to maintain compliance. Without Clara there to authorize the weekly security tokens and monitor the handshake logs, the system would automatically assume a security breach had occurred and initiate a defensive lockdown. Bradley had dismissed her warnings, believing that the software could run itself indefinitely without human intervention. He had even joked that documentation was just a way for engineers to justify their salaries. By Monday morning, the situation had escalated from minor system errors to a full-blown operational failure. Clara's phone was now ringing almost constantly, and the text messages from Wesley Pratt were becoming increasingly frantic. They needed her login credentials. They had quick questions. They needed a brief consultation. They had assigned Zachary Todd, a 26-year-old engineer whose only qualification was a willingness to work for a third of Clara's salary to manage the bridge. But Zachary was entirely out of his depth. He sat in Clara's old chair, staring at flashing red errors on the monitor, while Julianne Mercer, a senior administrator, watched him with quiet pity. Zachary did not know the custom security handshake keys, nor did he understand the strict federal standards governing the data stream. He was trying to use basic scripts to bypass a system that had been designed to resist hacking, unaware that his actions were triggering security alarms at the government agency. Clara ignored all of their messages. Under the terms of the conditional resignation letter she had submitted, she was still technically an employee of the company, but since they had escorted her from the building and cut off her network access, she was legally using her accumulated paid time off. She spent Monday and Tuesday off the grid, enjoying a long hike at Red Rocks. The massive red sandstone monoliths rose around her like ancient guardians, their silent strength a comforting contrast to the fragile, nervous energy of the corporate world. She walked the Trading Post Trail, listening to the wind through the pines and watching the blue jays fly across the canyon. The physical exertion cleared her mind, and she felt the tension of the past few months melt away. Her father had always told her that nature had a way of putting human greed in its place, and as she stood on the ridge looking down at the city of Denver, she felt entirely justified in her silence. At 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, a call came from Lawrence Croft, the general counsel for Summit Crest Ventures, the parent company. Lawrence was a seasoned corporate attorney who only intervened when there was a significant financial threat to the organization. Clara answered the call, maintaining a polite and calm tone. Lawrence tried to sound friendly and reasonable, suggesting that there had been a simple technical misunderstanding regarding her transition. He explained that they needed her to log in briefly to complete a routine system handshake so the Aegis bridge could resume operations and stop the database errors. Clara listened patiently, then replied that she was currently unavailable, as she was on vacation and using her accrued paid time off. Lawrence's tone immediately shifted, losing its false warmth. He told Clara that the system's stability was critical and that they needed her assistance immediately to prevent contract breaches with government clients. Clara remained completely unbothered. She reminded Lawrence of the letter she had submitted to Brenda Greer on Friday afternoon. She explained that Brenda had accepted her conditional resignation, which explicitly stated that her resignation would only become effective once all of her contract benefits, including the immediate vesting of her equity and the payout of her bonuses, were resolved. Since those conditions had not been met, she was still technically on payroll, but because they had locked her out of the system, she was utilizing her vacation days. Lawrence was silent for several seconds, and the quiet on the line was the sound of a corporate lawyer realizing his company was facing a massive legal liability. By Wednesday morning, the corporate bravado had completely dissolved. Lawrence Croft called again, his voice now careful and measured. He requested an urgent Zoom conference to discuss a resolution to the situation. Clara agreed, but only on the condition that her attorney, Regina Ross, was present. At 10 o'clock, Clara sat in Regina's office, which was filled with heavy oak, bookshelves, legal volumes, and overlooked the mountain peaks. Across the digital screen, Lawrence sat in a spacious conference room at the parent company's headquarters in Boston. Next to him was Wesley Pratt, the chief financial officer of Vertex Dynamics. Wesley looked exhausted, his face pale and his usual smug expression replaced by a look of sheer desperation. He stared at a pile of folders, refusing to make eye contact with Clara. Lawrence opened the meeting by stating that they had reviewed Clara's 2018 executive agreement in detail. He admitted that under the change in control provisions, if her position was eliminated without cause, her equity was indeed scheduled to vest immediately. Regina Ross took the lead, her voice calm but razor-sharp. She pointed out that Vertex Dynamics had not only eliminated Clara's role, but they had also accepted her conditional resignation and then immediately cut off her access and duties before fulfilling the financial conditions of that resignation. Under Colorado law, specifically the wage claim statutes, this sequence of events created a clear case of constructive termination. The company had essentially fired Clara without cause while trying to label it a resignation, violating both her executive contract and state employment regulations. Wesley's hands trembled as Regina spoke, and he adjusted his collar, looking pleadingly at Lawrence. Regina Ross cleared her throat, adjusting her glasses as she leaned toward the camera. She explained that constructive dismissal, under Colorado common law, occurs when an employer makes working conditions so intolerable that a reasonable person would feel compelled to resign. However, in Clara's case, the situation was even more clear-cut because of the specific sequence of events. She had submitted a resignation that was explicitly conditional. A conditional resignation is not an immediate termination of employment. It is an offer to resign only after certain specified conditions are met. when Vertex Dynamics accepted the resignation form, but immediately revoked her network credentials, blocked her building access, and stripped her of her operational duties, they did not fulfill the conditions. By treating her as terminated without fulfilling the conditions, the company had unilaterally altered the terms of her employment, which legally constitutes an involuntary termination without cause. Since her executive agreement from 2018 specifically stated that a termination without cause triggers the immediate vesting of all stock options, a salary continuation for 12 months, and the payout of all performance bonuses, the company was contractually obligated to pay her the full amount immediately. Wesley Pratt suddenly leaned forward, slamming his hand on the table and accusing Clara of holding the company's systems hostage for money. He claimed it was nothing more than extortion and threatened to call the police. Clara did not react to his anger. She looked directly into the camera and told Wesley that this was simply the consequence of the cost-cutting measures he had designed. She explained that she was demanding the full value of her contract, which totaled $1,690,000. This figure included her vested equity, salary continuation, and the performance bonuses she had earned but had been denied. She made it clear that she had no obligation to help them fix their system until they honored their financial commitments to Clara. In addition, Clara demanded the immediate reimbursement of $24,000 in business expenses from her trips to Boston. She noted that Wesley's department had purposely sat on those receipts for 3 months to make their fourth quarter margins look better. Clara interjected, her voice calm and steady. She explained that during her trip to Boston in August, she had worked 16-hour days to coordinate the integration of the Aegis compliance bridge with Summit Crest Ventures' central server architecture. She had saved every receipt for the hotel, the meals, and the rental cars, submitting them through the company's automated expense system. Wesley's department had flagged the expenses as requiring auditing, which was a blatant lie. Regina produced the copy of the email, where Wesley had written to the accounts payable manager, instructing them to hold all expense reimbursements for senior staff until the next fiscal year to ensure that the division's fourth quarter numbers met the targets required for his personal executive bonus. The revelation was devastating, as it proved that the chief financial officer had engaged in self-serving financial manipulation at the expense of the employees. Wesley fell silent, his mouth half open, unable to find a response. Lawrence Croft held up a hand to silence Wesley before the chief financial officer could say anything else. Lawrence knew that Clara and Regina had them cornered. If they went to court, the discovery process would expose the company's systemic pattern of pushing out older employees, their financial manipulations, and the bad faith termination of a 21-year veteran. The resulting legal fees, combined with the damages from a public lawsuit and the loss of government contracts, would dwarf the $1,690,000 Clara was demanding. Lawrence took a slow breath, rubbed his temples, and asked Regina what it would take to finalize an agreement by Thursday afternoon. The executives who had tried to humiliate Clara on Friday were now pleading for a quick exit, realizing that their cheap maneuver was going to cost them a fortune. While the attorneys argued over the legal language, the operational crisis at the Vertex Dynamics office was spiraling out of control. The Aegis compliance bridge remained locked down, and the Department of Transportation data portal was completely unstable. The government compliance officers had noticed the interruption in the security logs and had already issued a formal warning. Vertex Dynamics was facing contract penalties of $50,000 for every day the system remained offline, and the threat of permanent contract termination was growing. Without Aegis, the company's main software platform was virtually useless, and the parent company's board of directors was demanding answers from the executive leadership. At 11 o'clock on Thursday morning, Clara received a text message from Julianne Mercer, a senior systems administrator who had worked under Clara for 12 years. Julianne wrote that the office was in absolute chaos. Bradley Thorne was pacing the corridors, screaming at the IT staff and demanding that they bypass the security protocols to force Aegis online. The younger engineer, Zachary Todd, was sitting at Clara's old desk, sweating profusely as he tried to decipher the complex cryptographic handshakes. Julianne wrote that the Department of Transportation portal was showing a critical error, and the client was threatening to cancel the entire contract by Friday night if the system was not stabilized. Bradley had even ordered a physical server restart, which had only worsened the database corruption and locked them out further. Julianne's messages described the sheer panic in the server room. The air conditioning was humming loudly, and the server racks were flashing amber lights, indicating a database synchronization failure. Bradley Thorne had stormed into the room, his face red and his tie loosened, screaming at the IT technicians to bypass the security handshakes. The younger engineer, Zachary Todd, was sweating so much that his fingers were slipping on the keyboard as he tried to run a script to force the Aegis port open. When they attempted a physical server restart, the database became corrupted, causing the Department of Transportation portal to flag the connection as a potential breach. This immediately triggered an automated alert to the Federal Compliance Agency, which sent an email warning of a permanent suspension of Vertex Dynamics access. Julianne wrote that the support staff is receiving dozens of calls from angry clients whose shipments were stuck at the regional hubs because their compliance logs could not be verified. An hour later, Bradley Thorne called Clara directly. The swagger and arrogance he had displayed in the conference room were completely gone. He sounded desperate, his voice cracking, as he begged Clara to give them the system access package immediately, promising that they would sort out the financial details later. Clara sat in her kitchen, calmly preparing a cup of herbal tea. When Bradley's name flashed on Clara's phone screen, she was in the middle of preparing a cup of chamomile tea, enjoying the quiet afternoon in her kitchen. She let it ring twice before answering, and when she did, Bradley did not even greet her politely. He immediately began shouting, demanding that she give him the decryption keys and the admin password for the Aegis server. He tried to sound authoritative, telling her that she was putting the entire company at risk and that her career in the technology sector would be completely ruined if she did not cooperate. Clara listened to his rant, took a calm sip of her tea, and told him that he was the one who had put the company at risk when he decided that her 21 years of hard work and loyalty were worth only 3 weeks of severance. She pointed out that she had documented the transition protocol in detail and sent it to him 3 months ago. But he had chosen to ignore it because he thought she was easily replaceable. Bradley tried to threaten her, claiming he would tell the board that she was withholding critical access, but Clara remained unfazed. She told him to go ahead, as she had copies of every warning email he had ignored. By Friday morning, Summit Crest Ventures stopped pretending this was a minor technical issue. Beatrice Albright, the chief executive officer of the parent company, flew into Denver on a private jet before sunrise. She did not contact Bradley Thorne. Instead, she went straight to Lawrence Croft and then called Regina Ross to arrange an emergency meeting. When the Zoom call began, Beatrice looked like an executive who had spent the night analyzing bad news. Bradley was notably absent from the meeting. Beatrice stated that she had reviewed the contract files and the transition records, and she understood why the situation was far more expensive than her local executives had led her to believe. She offered to settle the financial claim immediately to get the Aegis system stabilized before the markets opened on Monday. Clara agreed, but added one non-negotiable condition. Bradley Thorne had to be removed from the company. Beatrice Albright did not waste time with introductory pleasantries. She opened her tablet and began reading from a security audit report. The report detailed how the failed override attempts by Zachary Todd had triggered alerts on the federal security monitors, who were now reviewing Vertex Dynamics' database security posture. This review could result in a blacklisting from all federal contracts, which would immediately wipe out 70% of Vertex Dynamics' projected revenue for the next fiscal year. Beatrice looked directly at Clara through the screen and acknowledged that Bradley Thorne's decision to terminate Clara without an orderly transition was the height of executive incompetence. Clara remained calm, nodding in agreement, and stated that the financial settlement of $1,700,000 was non-negotiable. She also reiterated that Bradley Thorne had to be removed from all operational authority immediately, explaining that his toxic management style was a systemic risk to the company's compliance posture. Beatrice Albright stared at Clara through the screen, her eyes calculating. She stated that she could not remove a sitting chief executive officer simply because a departing employee demanded it. Clara leaned forward, looking directly at the parent company's chief executive. She explained that if Bradley remained in power, the company would learn nothing. The staff would continue to work in fear, and the parent company would inevitably find itself in another crisis with the next senior employee Bradley decided to humiliate. Clara pointed out that Bradley's cost-cutting measures were actually costing the company millions in liability and lost client trust. The silence in the meeting was heavy as Beatrice weighed the options. Consulting quietly with the audit director sitting next to her seat, Beatrice muted her microphone for 10 seconds. When she returned, she announced that while she would not terminate Bradley immediately, she was placing him on immediate, non-operational administrative leave pending a full board review. She then asked if there was anyone within the current structure who could stabilize the Aegis system. Clara recommended Julianne Mercer, noting that Julianne had 12 years of experience and knew the client workflows perfectly. Clara also pointed out that Julianne was currently on Bradley's list for the next round of job cuts. Beatrice made a note of this, her expression grim as she realized the extent of Bradley's mismanagement. She agreed to appoint Julianne as the interim director of operations immediately. The legal teams finalized the agreement by 6 o'clock that evening. Clara received the full contract value of $1,700,000, including her vested equity, legal fees, and a neutral employment reference letter confirming her departure was not for cause. Once the funds were transferred and the signed documents were in her inbox, Clara sent the secure Aegis access credentials and transition protocols directly to Julianne Mercer. Within 9 minutes, Julianne called Clara, crying tears of relief. She reported that Aegis was stable, the Department of Transportation portal was back online, and Beatrice Albright had personally called Julianne herself to confirm her promotion. Clara congratulated Julianne and told her to take care of the team. Julianne told Clara that the atmosphere in the office had changed instantly. The dread and anxiety that had hung over the team for the past week had dissolved, replaced by a sense of hope and energy. For the first time in months, the engineers and support staff felt respected and valued. Julianne expressed her deep gratitude, acknowledging that Clara had not only protected her own interests, but had also saved the jobs of several team members who were on the chopping block. Clara told Julianne that she had earned the role of director through her years of hard work and dedication, and that she should lead the team with the same dignity and respect they had always deserved. They talked for several minutes, sharing stories of the early days and expressing their mutual respect before hanging up. 6 months later, Clara ran into Zachary Todd in a small coffee shop near the old office. She was sitting at a small table by the window, watching the autumn rain fall on the pavement when Zachary walked in, looking humbled and exhausted. The confidence he had once displayed was entirely gone. He stopped at Clara's table and apologized for his role in the transition, admitting that he had been naive and did not realize he was being used as cheap labor. Clara gave him advice on his career and was not angry. She told Zachary that he was not the disease, just a symptom of a corporate culture that valued cost over competence. Zachary told her that Julianne had completely turned the company around, that Bradley had been officially terminated by the board, and that Wesley Pratt had resigned in disgrace after an audit revealed he had manipulated third-quarter financial projections to justify the restructuring. Zachary stared down at his cup of black coffee, stirring it slowly as he spoke. He explained that after Clara left, Bradley had put immense pressure on him, demanding that he work 20-hour days and threatening to fire him if Aegis was not online. Zachary had realized too late that Bradley did not care about him or his career. He was simply using him as a cheap shield to cover up his own mistakes. He had been working himself to exhaustion for a fraction of the salary Clara had earned, only to be blamed by Bradley when the system failed. Clara listened with empathy, reminding him that many young professionals are lured into bad situations by promises of quick advancement, only to realize that they are dispensable in the eyes of corporate climbers. She advised him to focus on building his skills and to never allow another manager to rush him into a situation where his reputation would be compromised. Clara smiled, knowing that justice had finally been served. Today, Clara Vance uses her settlement money and her years of experience to run a consulting firm that helps other senior professionals navigate executive contract negotiations and protect themselves from corporate exploitation. Her father had been right. Power does not need to be loud. It just needs to be prepared. She had turned a 3-week lowball offer into a $1,700,000 lesson in respect for Vertex dynamics. As she walked through the park, watching the golden autumn leaves fall, Clara knew she had not just won a legal battle. She had reclaimed her dignity and helped protect the colleagues she had left behind. She had proven that the true value of experience could never be reduced to a cheap line item on a spreadsheet, and she was ready to help others learn that same lesson.